Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now this sinister bunch that are whirling around in front of me here are the Damned from Wargames Atlantic, and there's a bit of a story to go with these ones. Now these guys are part of a crowdfunding campaign that Wargames Atlantic are going to be doing. It starts in a couple of days, about 5 days time. The idea is that they want to be able to drop a complete range of 8 different boxes for these guys, maybe more, all at once. Now, fulfillment time on that, they're saying, is 12 months at maximum. Given the speed at which some of the previous boxes have come along from Wargames Atlantic, that sounds doable, particularly if this takes off. Now, they've very kindly let me have some prototypes for these, and at first I wasn't really going to do a video on them because they're kind of generic, but then I discovered, or rather I realized, that's an awesome thing about them. These guys aren't covered in spikes. They've not got 8-pointed stars etched into their breastplates. They're really great, generic-looking bad guys, and that's what really drew them to me the more I was looking at the parts. So, ultimately, yeah, let's give it a shot. I'll make sure that there is a link to the crowdfunding campaign down in the description because there is a ton of information. They've been quite ambitious with it, and I think if you're interested in these guys, they're definitely something worth having a look at. All the same, these methods will work on pretty much any miniature, like I always say. So if you've sat through this intro, I apologize for the length, all of the paints will be listed in the description below. Let's get started. Now this fella here, he is going to be my star of the show. Everything that I do to this guy, I'm going to do to the other two as well. So I'm going to do those off screen. There's going to be one big difference, and if you've watched the intro, you'll probably be able to guess what it is. But for everything else, this guy is going to be, like I said, the star. We're going to demonstrate on him. So I'm starting off. I have a big old makeup brush here. I tend to find them really useful because they're nice and soft, and you just pick them off of Amazon, and they're cheap dry brushes. They work super well. I've got some Tyrant Skull, and I haven't actually worked much of it off of my brush at all. What I'm going to do is go over pretty much everything, but in particular, I want to get his uniform and leave just a little bit of the primer, Zandri dust, underneath. Any areas that I struggle to reach, I'm not too fussed. They'll just be shaded. So, oh, I need more super glue. Oh well. All right, I'm going to finish the dry brushing, and then I will glue that bit back on. So once that's done, and your glue is dried, he is ready for the next stage. Now you'll see I've gone over the sack hood as well, mostly because at the moment I'm not 100% certain how I'm going to do it, so I'd rather have a lighter base to work from. You'll see for the most part that I've gone over until this is mostly Tyrant Skull, with just a little bit of Zandri dust in the recesses. We're now going to do something similar, but leave more of the Tyrant Skull behind. I have here Ivory from VALLEJO, and you could use instead here Pallid Witch Flesh. The colors themselves are going to be quite similar, and once we're finished, it's not going to matter all that much. What I'm going to do is go over the upper part of his uniform. I don't want to do this on his legs. We're just going to brighten this up a little bit further, particularly paying attention to edges, creases, and corners. So it's going to end up being a little bit lighter than his trousers, but I do want them to be 2 different colors. Now with all of that vigorous dry brushing done, we can move on. I'm probably going to end up leaving the sack hoods like this. We'll see as I go on, but I think that's about the right color. Anyhow, what I have now is tanned flesh from the Army Painter, and I'm just going to give the hands a couple of coats of this. There's nothing saying that you couldn't do these as gloves, a wee bit of dark brown or something, but I like, with stuff that doesn't tend to have a lot of personality, faces and stuff like that, sinister gas masks, I like having hands, visible skin, so that it's a little more obvious that someone is under there. I know it's probably an odd thing, but I love the idea that something gross and spooky and vile is also still visibly human in some fashion. So, your choice, of course, but I'm going with old reliable tanned flesh. Now what I'm going to do is use contrast to lay down the color of the jackets. I I'm going to do this now because if I make a mess, which I almost certainly am, I've got metallics to paint around the rest of the uniform, which will be able to tidy this up. So I'm quite deliberately, I want to avoid typical chaos looking colors. So I'm starting here, this is Gryph-Hound orange, and on the other two I am going to use Nazdreg yellow and Terradon turquoise. Now after having done that, they kind of look like Power Rangers. I really just wanted to demonstrate that they don't have to be painted in your typical chaos colors. So I wanted to avoid red and green and pink and stuff like that. I quite like this random assortment. We're going to move on. I'm going to concentrate once again on our number one here. So moving on, what I have here is German Grey. This is a VALLEJO color, and Corvus Black rather, is very similar. I'm going to paint in his boots with this, and as well, the filters on the gas masks, any hoses or what have you, if you've got one of the sack masks with a hose, this works quite well as a nice dark leathery or even metal color. And then leather details like straps and his belt, I'm going to paint with flat brown from VALLEJO. Now this is very similar to, Mournfang brown. So if that's what you've got, you can use that. I just tend to find this is a little bit darker, so it suits my purposes for this. And the coverage on it is just a little bit better. So if ever you see me talking about using a VALLEJO color instead of an equivalent Citadel color, coverage is ordinarily the reason. If I want to paint quickly, I want to paint in one coat as often as I can. And now at last we've reached a point where he's going to start looking a lot more finished. What I'm using here, this is dark gunmetal. This is a VALLEJO game color, one of the new ones. And it's very similar to, Iron Warriors from Citadel, but maybe a little bit darker, and it has a tiny touch of blue in it, which is pretty much going to disappear when we shade this, but again, coverage is really good on this. So all of his armor plates, I am going to apply this dark gunmetal. Now it seems a strange thing to say, but that was just really nice to paint with. The new game color range, I thoroughly recommend. They're just lovely paints. What I've got now is Iron Hand Steel, and this one I'm going to paint over the other metallic details. So weapons, belt buckles, and what have you. I will probably swap to a smaller brush to do the belt buckles, that's for sure. I'm going to briefly swap to this fella here because I'm going to get a much finer brush. I'm going to apply some vermilion on one side of all the shotgun shells. And on the other side, I'm going to apply a little bit of Retributor armor. And if I make a mistake here, I can very quickly go over it with my brown leather color. I'm also going to apply a little bit of this to the back of the respirator case on one of the sack hoods. Now for any stray bits of fabric, so wrappings or cloth and stuff like that, I'm going to use Morghast bone. You could use, Rakarth flesh instead, but Morghast bone has a little bit of yellow to it, and I want a slightly different appearance between this and, for example, the sack hood, which is still quite a plain beige color. Then the final color I'm going to apply as a base coat to these guys is some Black Legion. It doesn't have to be contrast, it could just as easily be ordinary black paint here. If you wanted to, you could instead paint these in with white or ivory, and then go over them with a contrast color, make them glow a little bit, but I like my awful spooky blank-eyed faces. Now once you're finished with your base coats, cruise around and do any tidy up that you need to, and we're going to shade them. What I'm going to use, this is Umber Wash from the VALLEJO game color range, and I find I just like this. It settles a little bit how Agrax Earthshade used to, but it dries much more matte, so just perfect for what I've got in mind. Go over the entire miniature, even the stuff that we've given the contrast treatment to, and then we'll leave this for about half an hour to dry. Now I want to show you on this guy first of all, because I love how that Umber Wash settles and what it does once it's dry. It's just, chef kiss. So I'm going to put him aside and we'll grab our example dude, Honestly, if I was going to be doing these guys for an army and just knocking out tons and tons of them, I'd put him on the table. You know, he's done. But we can take it a little bit further, so let's do that for the sake of argument. Let's have a look at what a wee bit more work will give us. But on that note, full disclosure, I am not going to highlight the trousers. If you did want to, then something like Screaming Skull will work very well. Ushabti Bone if you prefer a slightly darker highlight, but I don't think it's worth the extra effort. You know, they're not really the star of the show. What I have for the red fella here, so the orange fella rather, this is Fire Dragon Bright. I'm going to add just a little bit of this at some of the corners and edges. On the yellow fella, I'll be using Moondust from the Army Painter. And on our turquoise dude, I'll be using Royal Cloak, also from the Army Painter. Those two mostly because I really like those colors. If you want to brighten up the weapons or any of the other small little metal details, what you can do is go back to your Iron Hand Steel. You won't need very much of this, but just enough to make some of those raised edges shine will look pretty cool. You could add a little bit of rust wash on some of the weapons or some blood effects if you fancy, but again, we're looking at doing these guys pretty quickly. So the last thing that I'm going to do to kind of touch them up a little bit is put a tiny wee dot of ivory up into the corners of the lenses, followed by just a tiny wee bit of gloss varnish. I'm using here Art Coat, but any will do the job. So once I'm finished with this, I'm going to go ahead and pop a base on them. The recipe for that will be in the description. Let's get a look at these guys when they are all finished. And there at last, our The Damned are complete. And at first I was a little bit worried that the different colors would look kind of silly, but I actually quite like how they've turned out. I think if I was doing an army, I would still want to do them in uniform colors. But this kind of, I don't know, bad guy identifying thing, like a video game, you know, when you've got different enemy types that are different colors, so you can really quickly spot them on the table, on the screen rather, why not use that on the table? You know, I think I'm onto something that I wasn't planning. So again, thank you very much to Wargames Atlantic for letting me have the prototypes on these because they are brilliant. And I am really looking forward to seeing all of the boxes that they've got planned for the Damned. I think this is a really exciting opportunity for a new army to hit the ground running and really rustle things up. I'm really looking forward to seeing the alternate heads that they do for them too, because like I mentioned earlier, the fact that they aren't specifically chaotic, I think is going to make a lot of people happy. These are going to be really useful. As well, thank you very much to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment that I use, as well as all of the wonderful patrons who keep me ticking in paint and glue, including all of my beautiful producers on screen now. Now, if you have any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Twitter and Instagram are both linked down there too. So thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.